When I read the program today, and I knew this before, but it just hit me in a way. It doesn't tell you anything about what this is. Journey Home, what in the world is that? In fact, people ask me that and I wouldn't tell them. So I'll tell you later. So I'll tell you now. Journey Home is about end-of-life care. Journey Home is the name of a residence facility for people who are facing the end of their lives, but for one reason or another aren't able to die at home. And that often happens when people are on hospice. Hospice requires that there be support at home that's adequate to supplement, they supplement each other. And if there's no support, like the person lives alone, or if the family is not able or willing to support them when the hospice people are not there, then they've got to find an alternate place to go. In our community, the alternatives are a nursing home or an adult family home. That's what we call them in Washington State. I don't know what terms may be used elsewhere. It's a kind of a congregate care facility of a small size, 2 to 7 patients. The problem with those alternatives, well, there's twofold. One, they're not home. And most people would like to die at home if that's possible. And Journey Home is a place that is, as much as possible, made to be like home. I should also answer the question, where is Journey Home? And the answer is that it resides in the minds and imaginations and planning of myself and that small group of people who have joined me to form a board of directors and a corporation, nonprofit corporation, to create Journey Home. It's not here in the physical plane yet, but we can see it. We know there's a long road ahead, but we will create this. That's our intention. So when someone has to go to a nursing home, there are 2 problems. One is nursing home staffs are busy. They're good people. I've been in lots of them. I'm a hospice volunteer. And I'm always impressed with the way they treat their patients. But they can't stay around and talk and listen and just be with someone. They've got other things to do. The other problem is that these folks are trained to take care of patients, but in a general way. And by and large, they are not trained specifically to deal with supporting someone going through the dying process. And it is a process. It's not like you just die and then it's it. There's something going on with the patient that is often not visible to the outside. And we hope to change that and to begin that change. I want to quote Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen. Anybody heard of her? She was famous for writing the book Kitchen Table Wisdom. That's it. I didn't read it. But she says, I have observed the unmet needs of people at the end of life and seen how poorly health professionals are trained to meet them. We have made death into a technological and management issue and robbed it of its holy significance and dignity, which diminishes us all. We need a new way of seeing. And that's what we want to do. And I'm going to tell you the story of my journey through learning and being trained in this type of approach to end-of-life care. Several years ago, I heard Ram Dass give a speech to hospice people. And he was telling them, hospice is great and it's come a long way. We do a lot of good things, but there's more we can do. And he illustrated his point by telling a story about someone he knew who had cancer. She was in the hospital for treatment. I don't know that it had become at the terminal stage yet, so they were still hopeful. But still, she was in the hospital. She was a nurse by training. And she made a very keen observation that in spite of the fact that professional caregivers were continually coming into her room and doing things for her, helping her, caring for her, whether it's taking blood, emptying the urine bag, transferring her to the CAT scan room, whatever it was, there was a lot of activity in her room. And yet she felt isolated and alone. And I thought, well, how could that be? And he went on to explain that no one was making a personal connection with her. They would ask her if she had pain, blah, 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 but nobody was saying, are you afraid? What's going on with you right now? Would you like me to sit here with you? That was not happening. And that's what Rachel was getting at when she made her quote. Professionals are often taken up with their jobs and their duties, and it's a busy time. I've been in hospitals, and I see that people are managing machines in many different rooms, and it's not a time for contemplation. Now, there's a thought that just left my head. Well, it'll come back if it's important. Yes, that does work. Yeah, no. By the way, I meant to say thank you to all the presenters today because you have helped me tremendously. I don't know about you, but I have that voice in my head that when it comes to synchronicity and getting messages about my life journey and purpose and all that, there's a piece of me that says, no, you're making it up. And you have helped me have more confidence in my intuition. So Ram Dass's point about that story was that what we need is people who are able to stand firm in the face of suffering, loss, and death without flinching, so that they can truly be present with this person and not leave them to their own selves and hiding behind their caringness. You know, it's easy to get busy with something and wind up not really facing what's there. And the reason most people are that way is because we're afraid of death, our own death. We don't like to be reminded that we're mortal. And when we see somebody in a bed who could be terminally ill, that reminds us that we could be terminally ill too sometime. So they just kind of shield it away. When I heard Ram Dass speak this way, it just resonated with me, and I wanted to deepen my own practice in terms of hospice care, but I didn't know how to do it. I grew up with a very strict, narrow view of death and dying and what happens afterwards. Very fundamentalist Christian family to the extreme. And we thought we knew the answers, and there just wasn't any question about it. But I knew if I was a hospice volunteer, even though I had left that arena before, but as a hospice volunteer, I knew I would run into people who had their own views or who had no view, and they were afraid of what's going to happen. What would I say to them? Because I only have one source of information from my background. So I wanted a source of information that was universal. I kept thinking there's got to be some kind of a universal principle or set of principles or energy or something that is common to all human beings, regardless of their religious affiliations. And then I discovered Atlantic University. I had been a member of ARE for a while and didn't really notice the university until a certain point, and I began reading through the course descriptions, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I want. This is not getting into religion, but it is spirituality. It's beyond, it's the transpersonal world. That's what I was looking for. So I enrolled in the course. I'm almost done. I haven't written up the thesis yet, but I'm getting there. I have it in my head, so that's why I can speak today. I studied the most amazing things, and as you have, I'm sure, like meditation and near-death experiences. My particular interest was in death, so that's the kind of tack I took with my teachers. One teacher in particular, Henry Reed, in a creative writing course, recommended 2 books to me written by the same author who was a pathologist/coroner in Minnesota. She apparently was the kind of person who people found easy to trust. And her experience was that after a death and her investigation of it, often a family member or a friend would contact her and say, I have a story I want to tell you, but I can't tell anybody else because they'll think I'm crazy. And it's the kinds of things that you've probably all heard. Somebody speaking to someone who's died years ago. One story I remember in particular was a man who had not spoken for weeks, and he was apparently comatose. But suddenly in his bed, he he sat up straight, his eyes were wide open, and he said, "Lorraine," held up his hands, and fell back dead. Lorraine was his wife who had died years before. And you've heard those kind of stories. There's more of that going on than people realize, because that's a real occurrence. The courses at AU have helped me enormously to build that broad base of knowledge that I need to kind of play in these waters. But I found I also needed some tools. I wanted to be able to bring this stuff to the bedside and to be with the patient in a meaningful way. And as the universe does things, things open up. When the teacher's ready, or the student's ready, the master shows up. I discovered an organization called Metta Institute. And Metta, as has already been said, means loving kindness. This was started by a man named Frank Ostaseski back when the AIDS epidemic was just starting. And he lived in San Francisco and felt so bad about seeing so many men dying on the streets and the sidewalks that he wanted to provide at least a bed for them. And out of that grew the Zen Hospice Project, which was the first, at that time, the first, and is now the largest Buddhist-based hospice in the country. Frank was the CEO, and he left that position to focus on teaching. And he created this end-of-life care practitioner program out of that. And the organization eventually moved out of the hospice house, and it's now on its own. I had wanted to go to this for years because it seemed to teach the same kinds of techniques that Rachel Remen and Ram Dass were talking about. Both of those are on the faculty, by the way, of Metta. That was a life-transforming experience for me. And it was interesting because most of us went there expecting to learn some tools. I said that's what I wanted, and we did. But it wasn't about that. It was about personal transformation. And if you know anything about mindfulness and presence, I can go sit down because that's what it's all about. This program spanned 9 months. It consisted of 6 on-site visits in California. 4 of those were extended weekends. 2 of them were 8-day-long intensive retreats. In between times, we had homework. We had to read books. We had to contribute 150 hours each of service to dying people. We had on-site experience, which I call 3x3. That means we had to choose 3 different sites where we normally don't go, where people sometimes die, like an emergency room, critical care unit, and had to spend 3 hours in each one of those 3 sites. That really was tough for me because I don't do that for a living. A lot of the people in the course are doctors, nurses, social workers. They do it all the time. They have access to these things. We also had to do coaching calls, mentoring calls with faculty members, which was a real thrill. I got to have a personal conversation on the phone with Ram Dass. That was just the highlight for me. It was great. I'm pausing because I'm not going to say all this stuff that I've written down, but I just have some stories to tell you. The courses, let me read you quickly the names of the courses, the sessions that we studied. Compassionate Service was the first one, then Suffering and Transformation, Deepening Relationship, both with others and with self, Mystery and Awe, Cultivating Presence, and then Transition and Completion, which was actually the graduation weekend. The whole program is geared towards helping us as hospice workers be present with the patient. One time I was talking to Frank on the phone, having my call with him, and I mentioned that when I go to a home to visit, and by the way, I'm on the 11th hour team for our hospice because I work full-time. I can't do hospice work during the day. So we have a team that volunteers to fill in empty spaces at the bedside when family can't be there, and usually that's throughout the night. And I told him that, when I am there in the middle of the night, I often read a book or write in my journal. I get really good stuff to write. He said, listen, I'm going to be a little tough on you right now, but it sounds like you're trying to do presence at a distance. So when you're present with your book, you're not present with the patient. Same with the journal. You need to be present with the patient. And we learn to be present with others by learning to be present with ourselves. That's why at this retreat, all sessions, we did a lot of mindful meditation. We learned what that was about, going within, sitting with yourself, and letting those parts of yourself that need to be expressed come up in your thoughts. When we got to the suffering and transformation piece, there's one story I want to tell you. This is an exercise we did that I hope I never have to do again. We were told to sit in a big circle, and they passed out cards to us. Colored cards. There were 3 sets of 4 cards each. Each set was a different color. We didn't know what was coming. So Frank told us on the first set of cards, write one name on each card of 4 people that you love. In the second set, write 4 things or places that you love. On the last set, write 4 roles that you play that are important to you. Father, CEO, plumber, whatever it is. And then put them out in front of you. And then he said, now, I want you to take 1 card from each group and put it aside, which represents the loss of that. And with a person, that means death. I have 3 kids and a grandson. I have 2 grandsons now, but then I had 1. Those were the names on my cards. How in the hell can you make a choice like that? The only thing I could do was say, I can't let go of my kids. I just can't do that. So poor little Luke had to go away. Well, we got done with that, and Frank said, okay, we're going to do it again. And I thought, I was thinking, at least I saved my kids. He said, but this time, you don't have to pick one from every group. You can just pick 3 cards, anywhere you want. I said, okay, I'll gladly give up a role or a vacation or whatever it is if I can have my kids. And that was fine. That was easy. Then he said, okay, one more time. This time you get to make no choices about this. And his partner, Angie, who was the co-teacher at the group, was going to play the role of death. And he said, she will come and stand before each one of you in turn. And she has the ability to take any card that she wants, any number of cards, or none. She started on the other side of the room from me, and as she began to move around, I could hear people crying. And the woman next to me was just trying her hardest to stifle her sobs. And at one point, I just quit feeling. I just didn't want to face that. It was too much. And then I thought, no, this is meant for something. You can't cop out now. So I let the feelings back in, and when she came to me, she took my son, one of my sons. And I suffered. I really suffered. And the whole point of that, 2 points of this was, how can we relate to other people's suffering if we don't know what it feels like? Because there are ways that we avoid suffering, and we studied this in the class. It doesn't feel good. And what am I going to do if I'm face to face with a parent who's losing a child, and they're distraught and angry, depressed? What am I going to do and say to them if I haven't felt that myself, at least a glimpse of it? The other part of it was to transform us. By facing our own suffering, we become stronger and more open. It's when we close that we don't suffer because we're not feeling it. I am not going to get through this in time, I can tell. One of the books we read was called The Dying in Grace. The Grace in Dying, How We Are Transformed Spiritually as We Die, by Kathleen Dowling Singh. She had this beautiful description of the journey of the ego. Now, I'm not a psychologist, so if there's anybody in here who is a psychologist, please have mercy on me. I'm just repeating what I think I understood. So as the ego emerges from the ground of being, it begins to kind of wall off itself. Things that are scary that it encounters, it defends itself against these things, like me versus other and non-me. And then it arrives at a point where it's a fully developed ego. Kathleen Dowling herself said about her book, "These chapters describe the steps by which we human beings unfold to the point of a well-developed personal self, and the steps by which we unfold beyond that personal self into dimensions of spirit. The nearing death experience," and that's her word for it, "the nearing death experience is apparently a universal process marked primarily by dissolution of the body and the separate self, and the ascendancy of spirit." So in other words, she was saying that as we approach death, we go through the same process as birth, but only in reverse. And all of these defenses begin to fall away because we're losing energy. We no longer have the energy to hold them back. And that can be a terrifying experience. You've lived all your life identifying with these outer things, and now you're having to face your inner self with no defenses. That may be why a lot of people, as they're close to dying, they become very agitated, or they say odd things, because they're going through a painful experience. And if I am there and am present with them, I give them support, and I can help them through that. I was with a patient once, and one of the techniques we learned was to listen with not only our ears and mind, but with our hearts and our bodies, because there's information that relates to all of that. And I was sitting with a patient, it was about midnight, and I just kind of looked at her in a special way. She was asleep. And I immediately got a sense of fear. I felt this fear, and I had nothing going on in my life that would explain that. So I thought, she's feeling fear. She's going through this, and she's afraid. So I just prayed for her, sent her metta, loving kindness prayers. About an hour later, I tuned in again, and I could actually feel peace. It wasn't my peace, it was her peace. So that is a way that we can support people. We can be a witness to what's going on. I'm past my 30 seconds, right? Can I tell a story? One more story? This is a story that is important, very important personally to me. And it relates to, yeah, right, forget it. It relates to everything that's been said today about synchronicity, about purpose. My father was dying this last summer. We all knew it. I mean, he'd been dying for a while, and he was starting to decline faster. But as I noticed this going on, I was also looking at the calendar and realizing that there was an 8-day silent meditation retreat coming up at Metta. And it was looking like these two dates could coincide. And I had to make a choice. I could either, if you skip the retreat, you're in trouble. You either have to find an alternative silent retreat to go to, or you don't graduate. So I wanted to go to the retreat, so I could either say goodbye to him, knowing that I might not see him again. Or I could skip the retreat and be with him, but he might not die for a couple of months. You just can't tell. And I've learned that in my experience. You cannot tell when somebody's going to die. Dad was still the fundamentalist. And so as I was learning more about hospice work, he was not impressed. The reason was, and he didn't say this in so many words, but I know how he thought. If you have a patient who's not saved and you're helping them on their way to hell. So what good are you doing? And he just always dismissed that piece of my work. And I eventually accepted that, that's him. But I decided that I would go to this retreat. I took the day off of work, the day before I was to leave, drove up to the nursing home and was going to sit with him for a while. He was not conscious, hadn't been for a while. As I was coming up in the elevator, my cell phone rang. It was the nurse on the floor, and she said, You should tell your family that if they want to see him before he dies, they should come now. And I said, I am literally on my way up. And I walked out of the elevator, and both of us are facing each other with our cell phones. But she said, come on back to the room, I'll show you. And there are physical signs when the body is starting to shut down. The extremities become discolored and mottled. She showed me his leg, and it was all the way from his foot up past his knee was that way. So I knew this time he was going to go. And I mean, here's the irony of the whole thing. I went up there to say goodbye to him. He said goodbye to me and freed me to go to this retreat without worrying. And I believe in my gut that that was his message to me. As we die, one of the things that happens is that our consciousness expands. As we get closer and closer to the ground of being or God or whatever you want to call it, we begin to see things from a broader perspective. And I believe that my father got to the point where he could see that his narrow view was not necessarily helpful. And by his choosing to die on that day, he was saying to me, I get it. Go do your work. It's important. And I don't want you to worry about me. And he left. It was a wonderful gift for me. And as if to top it off, when I got on the plane the next day to fly to California, I felt this urge to sit on the right side of the plane by the window. I normally don't do that. I like the aisle seat. It's easier to go to the bathroom when you have to do that. But something inside me said, sit by the window on the right side. So I did. Plane took off, and as we were climbing, I always like to look out and try to see if I can tell where we are, because it's familiar territory. When I looked down, what I saw was the nursing home where he died. And I felt him. It was like his spirit was just hanging around, just to see what happens. So that's my story about synchronicity, about gifts, about the unseen world that really exists and has an impact on us. The rest of this part of my project is done and is continuing. Every time I go see a patient, I'm giving a service to the community. Now all we need to do is find it a home. Thank you very much.